What if I told you that there's one man who owns more land than the entire state of Delaware, and he's using it to bring back species everyone thought were extinct? That's Ted Turner, the media mogul who built a 2 million-acre ranch empire that looks like something out of a frontier myth, except it's very real. But how'd he pull it off? And what's actually happening on all that land? Let's find out. The moonscape nobody wanted. Picture this. It's 1989. A wind-swept Montana hillside, 113,000 acres of land so destroyed it looked like the surface of the moon. Ted Turner stood there staring at what everyone else saw as a complete waste of money. The grassland was so overgrazed and beaten down by decades of poor management that you could walk for miles without seeing a single blade of native grass, just dirt, rocks, and the occasional scrub brush clinging to life. The previous owners had nearly killed the land entirely. Overgrazing, bad rotation practices, zero care for long-term sustainability. It was ecological devastation on a scale most people couldn't even comprehend. Turner paid $22 million for it. His own advisors begged him to reconsider. Local ranchers, the guys who'd worked Montana land their entire lives, laughed at the city's slicker who thought he could fix something that had been ruined for generations. The consensus was clear. Ted Turner just lit $22 million on fire buying a moonscape. But here's the thing about Turner that separates him from basically everyone else with money. He saw something nobody else could see. Standing on that barren hillside, he didn't see wasteland. He envisioned something that hadn't existed for over 150 years. Massive herds of American bison thundering across restored prairie grasslands, just like they had before we nearly drove them to extinction in the 1800s. Everyone told him it was impossible. The land was too far gone. The bison were too few. The whole idea was a fantasy cooked up by someone with more money than sense. What happened next became the greatest private conservation success story in American history. But to understand how audacious Turner's plan actually was, you need to grasp the scale of what he was attempting, because the numbers sound completely insane. The impossible vision. American bison had been reduced from 60 million animals roaming the Great Plains to fewer than 1,000 by 1890. 60 million to 1,000. Let that sink in for a second. Most of the remaining animals were locked in zoos or tiny government herds, scattered across the country like museum pieces. The idea of creating large, free-roaming herds that could actually function as wild populations seemed like absolute fantasy. But Turner had two things most people don't: unlimited resources and an unshakable belief that impossible just means nobody's done it yet. Over the next 3 decades, he spent over $2 billion, yeah, with a B, purchasing struggling cattle ranches across 15 states. Not just buying land, but systematically assembling an empire that now covers more than 2.4 million acres. To put that in perspective, Turner owns more land than the entire state of Delaware. His holdings are larger than Yellowstone and Yosemite National Parks combined. If his ranches were a state, they'd rank 42nd in size. Today, Turner's ranches run over 51,000 head of American bison, the largest private herd in the world, and roughly 10% of all bison in North America. But those numbers only tell part of the story, because what happened when those first bison hit that Montana grassland? That's when things got emotional. The day everything changed. Turner's ranch manager still tells this story, and apparently grown men cry every time they hear it. The day they released the first bison onto the Flying D Ranch in Montana, these animals had spent their entire lives in small government pens. They'd never experienced the freedom their ancestors knew. They'd never seen open prairie or felt wind across miles of grassland. When the gates opened, the bison just stood there, confused, uncertain. For several long minutes, nothing happened. Then one old bull stepped forward, lifted his massive head, and sniffed the Montana air. Something ancient stirred in his memory. Some genetic code passed down through generations that recognized this as home. Suddenly, he took off running. And within seconds, the entire herd was galloping across land their ancestors had roamed 150 years earlier, their hooves creating a sound like thunder that could be heard for miles. Grown cowboys who'd worked cattle their entire lives were wiping tears from their eyes. It was the moment Turner knew his impossible dream was actually going to work. But what happened next? That's when things got truly wild. Because the bison didn't just survive on Turner's ranches. They started healing the land itself in ways that shocked every expert who'd written the whole thing off as a billionaire's vanity project. The transformation NASA saw from space. Now here's the part where the story shifts from inspiring to genuinely mind-blowing. Unlike cattle, which tend to graze the same areas repeatedly until the grass is gone, bison move constantly across the landscape following ancient migration patterns encoded in their DNA. Their hooves break up compacted soil. Their wallowing, when they roll around in dirt, creates microhabitats for plants and insects. And their grazing actually stimulates grass growth instead of destroying it. The transformation was so dramatic that NASA satellites started tracking the changes from space. Areas that showed up as brown, barren wasteland in 1990, satellite photos began turning green. Within a decade, grasslands that hadn't existed for over a century were visible from orbit. Scientists were stunned. This wasn't supposed to be possible. Restoring degraded rangeland typically takes generations, if it happens at all. But the bison weren't just bringing back grass. They were resurrecting an entire ecosystem everyone thought was gone forever. Prairie dogs, those little rodent guys that build underground cities, started emerging from burrows that had been empty for decades. Native birds that had disappeared began nesting again. Wildflowers nobody had seen in a century started blooming. And Turner wasn't content to just wait around for nature to heal itself on its own timeline. He launched the most ambitious private species recovery program in American history, focusing on animals that were literally on the verge of blinking out of existence. The wolf program? That's where things got controversial. The species nobody thought could be saved. When Turner began breeding Mexican gray wolves on his New Mexico ranches, there were fewer than 50 left in the entire world. 50. Total. Disease wiped out entire litters before they could grow. Genetic problems threatened the bloodline because there simply weren't enough animals to maintain diversity. Turner had already spent millions with nothing to show for it, and his advisors were telling him to cut his losses and quit. The government questioned whether a private citizen should even be breeding endangered predators. Environmental groups worried he was playing God with nature. Local ranchers were terrified he'd release wolves that would decimate livestock. But on a cold February morning in 2008, something miraculous happened. The first healthy wolf pups born on Turner's ranch in over 50 years opened their eyes. Today, Turner's ranches have successfully bred and released dozens of Mexican gray wolves back into the wild, playing a crucial role in saving the species from extinction. Not slowing the decline, actually reversing it. And if you think that's impressive, wait until you hear about the ancient reptiles that survived the Ice Age but almost didn't survive us. The Bison tortoise story is legitimately wild. These prehistoric-looking giants can live over 100 years and weigh up to 100 pounds. When Turner started his breeding program, fewer than 2,500 existed worldwide. The challenge was enormous. These tortoises take 15 to 20 years to reach sexual maturity, and females only lay eggs every few years. Most experts said it was hopeless. There simply wasn't enough time to save them before they disappeared. Turner's Ladder Ranch in New Mexico now maintains one of the largest captive populations of Bison tortoises in the world. Watching these prehistoric giants lumber across the desert landscape is like stepping back 10,000 years. The ranch has successfully bred hundreds, ensuring that a species that survived the Ice Age won't disappear on our watch. But here's the genius part, and this is where Turner separates himself from every other wealthy conservationist who throws money at problems and hopes for the best. He figured out how to make the whole thing profitable. The restaurant empire built on bison burgers. Turner realized something crucial. For his vision to succeed long-term, it couldn't just be a billionaire's pet project burning cash forever. It had to pay for itself. That's when he created Ted's Montana Grill, a restaurant chain serving exclusively bison meat from his ranches. The idea seemed completely insane at first. Americans had been eating beef for generations. Why would they suddenly switch to bison? Wouldn't it be too gamey? Too expensive? Too weird? Turns out bison meat is significantly healthier than beef. More protein, less fat, higher levels of omega-3s and other beneficial nutrients. It's also produced with far less environmental impact since bison are perfectly adapted to grassland environments and don't need the grain, antibiotics, and intensive management that cattle require. The restaurants were an instant success. Today, Ted's Montana Grill operates over 40 locations across the United States and has served millions of customers bison burgers, steaks, and meatloaf, creating a market that helps fund Turner's entire conservation operation. Think about the brilliance of this for a second. Turner created a vertically integrated business that controls every aspect of production from pasture to plate. He owns the land, raises the bison, processes the meat, and sells it directly to consumers through his own restaurants. Quality control at every step, maximum profit margins, and all the revenue flowing back into conservation. It's a perfect closed loop. The bison restore the grasslands support more bison. The bison provide meat for the restaurants. The restaurants generate revenue that funds more land acquisition and conservation work. Rinse and repeat. And the economic impact extends way beyond just Turner's bottom line, because his ranch empire has become a lifeline for rural communities that were dying before he showed up. The economic miracle. Turner's ranches generate over $100 million annually while providing hundreds of jobs in rural communities across the West that were hemorrhaging population and opportunity. But the economic ripple effect goes way deeper than just ranch employment. In small towns that had been struggling for decades, Turner's operations brought new life. Suddenly, there were good-paying jobs for ranch hands, wildlife biologists, hunting guides, restaurant workers, mechanics, veterinarians, equipment dealers, the whole ecosystem of businesses that support large-scale ranching operations. Local suppliers started thriving again, selling millions of dollars worth of feed, fuel, equipment, and services across multiple states. Veterinarians who'd been barely scraping by suddenly had steady clients. Equipment dealers moved inventory. Agricultural service providers found new customers. The hunting and ecotourism programs brought visitors from around the world to rural areas, supporting local hotels, restaurants, and shops. Property taxes from Turner's ranches provided significant revenue for local governments, helping fund schools, roads, and public services in counties that had been financially struggling. Small communities that had been dying suddenly had a reason to hope again. That's not hyperbole. There are towns in Montana and New Mexico where Turner's operations are the economic backbone keeping everything else alive. But while everyone was focused on the bison and the economics, something else was happening on Turner's ranches that most people never hear about. And it's arguably just as important. The scientific revolution, hiding in plain sight. Turner's ranches have quietly become some of the most important ecological research sites in North America. Universities and research institutions conduct groundbreaking studies on everything from climate change impacts to wildlife behavior to grassland restoration techniques on Turner's properties. The data coming out of these ranches is revolutionizing our understanding of how ecosystems actually function. Scientific papers based on research from Turner's properties get published regularly in leading journals, advancing conservation science worldwide. Turner's invested millions in research infrastructure, weather monitoring stations, wildlife tracking equipment, laboratory facilities, supporting research that benefits conservation efforts far beyond his own holdings. Students and researchers from around the world come to study here, learning techniques they take back to their home countries. It's like having a university dedicated entirely to conservation, funded by bison burgers. And the technology, it's legitimately cutting edge. GPS collars track bison movements across hundreds of thousands of acres, helping managers understand grazing patterns with incredible precision. Each collar costs over $3,000 and monitors location, activity levels, even health status in real time. The system can predict when a bison is about to give birth, detect illness before symptoms appear, and track complex social dynamics within the herds. Weather monitoring stations provide real-time data on precipitation, temperature, wind, information that helps managers optimize grazing rotations and predict forage availability with scientific accuracy. Aerial surveys using drones cover areas that would take ground crews weeks to assess. providing managers with the information they need to make critical decisions about stocking rates and habitat improvements. But perhaps the most unexpected thing that's happened on Turner's ranches? The predators came back on their own. The predator, paradise that shocked everyone. As Turner's grasslands recovered and wildlife populations exploded, something nobody planned for started happening. Predators began returning on their own. Mountain lions, bears, coyotes, species that hadn't been seen on these properties for decades, started showing up. And instead of viewing them as threats to be eliminated, Turner embraced them as crucial parts of the ecosystem. His ranches now support some of the healthiest predator populations in the American West, proving that large private ranches can sustain complete ecosystems, including top predators that require vast territories. The predator recovery has been so successful that Turner's ranches are now used as source populations for reintroduction efforts in other areas. Wolves, mountain lions, bears from Turner's properties have been relocated to help restore predator populations across the West. Scientists have been amazed by how quickly predator-prey relationships re-establish themselves. The presence of predators has actually improved the health of prey populations by removing weak and sick animals, creating natural selection pressure that strengthens the herds. And here's something that seems impossible but is absolutely true. Turner has increased water availability in some of the most arid regions of the American West. Through careful watershed management and restoration, his ranches now capture and store more water than when he purchased them. Stream restoration projects have brought back native fish populations and improved water quality throughout entire watersheds. Many of Turner's properties include critical headwater areas that supply major river systems. By protecting these watersheds and improving their health, the ranches provide clean water for communities hundreds of miles downstream. But while all this conservation work sounds noble and inspiring, let's be real. Turner's also making serious money off hunting programs that would make some environmentalists' heads explode. The hunting revolution that funds everything. Turner's hunting programs have completely revolutionized the relationship between hunters and conservationists, proving these groups don't have to be enemies. His ranches offer some of the finest hunting experiences in North America: trophy-quality animals, professional guide services, pristine wilderness settings that attract hunters from around the world willing to pay premium prices. And we're talking premium. Some hunts cost tens of thousands of dollars for a single experience. But here's the thing. Hunters pay it because they know they're supporting one of the most successful conservation programs in American history. The hunting programs generate millions of dollars annually that directly fund habitat restoration, species recovery, and research efforts. Every license sold helps pay for the conservation work that benefits all wildlife, not just game species. The hunting is carefully managed using scientific principles to ensure sustainable populations while maximizing conservation benefits. Harvest quotas are based on population data, age structure, and ecosystem health, not just profit maximization. And the success of Turner's approach has changed how many people think about hunting and conservation. Instead of being opposed forces, they've become partners in restoring America's wildlife heritage. Ted's Montana Grill has done something similar for the average consumer. The restaurants have served over 50 million bison meals, introducing Americans to a healthier, more sustainable way of eating, while creating a market that supports bison producers across the country, multiplying the conservation impact far beyond Turner's ranches. Every meal becomes a lesson in conservation, connecting consumers directly to the land and animals that sustain us. But here's what all of this, the bison, the wolves, the tortoises, the grasslands, the restaurants, the hunting programs, the research, really represents when you step back and look at the whole picture. The legacy that outlasts everything. Ted Turner has accomplished something that seemed impossible when he stood on that barren Montana hillside in 1989. He's proven that one person's vision can literally bring species back from extinction and heal millions of acres of damaged land. His 2.4 million acre empire represents one of the largest private conservation efforts in human history. The ecosystems he's restored will continue providing benefits for wildlife and human communities for generations. The species he's helped save, the bison, the wolves, the tortoises, will thrive long after we're all gone because of his vision and commitment. But perhaps most importantly, Turner proved that conservation and economic success aren't opposing forces. His ranches are profitable businesses generating over $100 million annually while healing land and saving species from extinction. That's the blueprint. That's the model that could be replicated across the country if more wealthy landowners decided restoration was worth pursuing. The ranch managers, the scientists, the restaurant workers, the hunting guides, the local communities, they're all part of a system that works because it was designed to be sustainable from the beginning. Not dependent on grants or government funding or nonprofit donations, but self-sustaining through smart business practices that align profit with conservation. Turner's ranches will continue long after he's gone, maintained by the economic engine he built around them. The bison will keep thundering across restored prairies. The wolves will keep hunting. The tortoises will keep lumbering across New Mexico deserts. And maybe, just maybe, other billionaires will look at what Turner accomplished and realize their money could do more than just buy yachts and mansions. It could bring entire ecosystems back from the dead. From a moonscape nobody wanted to the greatest wildlife comeback story in American history, Ted Turner built an empire that proves impossible is just another word for not done yet. And honestly, that's not just conservation. That's vision. That's legacy. That's using wealth to create something that actually matters long after the bank accounts close and the headlines fade. The man owns more land than Delaware and used it to save species from extinction. If that's not the American dream evolved into something better, I don't know what is. And that's a wrap on how Ted Turner pulled off a miracle by turning a barren land into a massive multi-billion-dollar ranch. Which part of his story impressed you the most? Let me know in the comments, and for more such amazing peeks into the lives of the rich, take a look at Global Status.